Well, welcome back, folks. I think I've got all the black painted parts that I'm going to have powder coated sorted and prepared to go out for that powder coating at a vendor. Real briefly, we have the frame, obviously, the foot peg bar here along the bottom. I did put a lot of time into straightening that foot peg bar, and if you recall, I think from a previous video, where it mounts to the frame there at the bottom had some curves and wrinkles to it. I took as much of that out as I could. It's not 100% perfect, but it's much better than it was before, and the foot peg bar does fit correctly now, so I think that's all sorted out. We have the air cleaner housing right here. You can see one little interesting note. This is the air cleaner element, or the element, the actual filter itself I took out of that canister right there. I believe the previous owner made this. It looks very recent. It doesn't look like it's ever been really used in an environment because it's so clean. He did a pretty good job of making it, actually. I have done something similar in the past. This filter media is integrated into that canister. You can't buy this, at least as far as I know, separate. He realized that, I'm sure, and either the original was deteriorated and fell apart, which is very common, or it was missing entirely, and he just went ahead and made one. And again, I think he did a pretty decent job. These edges were all glued together like that. I had to break the bond to get it apart. I don't know whether I'll use this piece or make my own when the time comes, because those are very hard to find. I have not been able to locate a new filter unit for this machine, so I'll probably end up making my own. But that's the air cleaner housing. Of course, the swing arm over here. I did press the bushings out with my 20-ton shot press. It wasn't a big deal. I used a couple of sockets. It took me 5 minutes to press those out. They came out with some difficulty. They did not want to move, but they couldn't resist that 20-ton press. And of course, I supported the unit really well to make sure I didn't bend anything. But so the swing arm's ready to go. Down here in the middle, you can see the bracket for the front fender. Let me get that a second. There's something I want to talk about on that. You will notice on this front fender bracket, it's got a concave shape to it. That's intentional. At first, when I looked at that, I thought, is that bent? It almost looks like it was damaged, but it's not. This shape right here, it fits like this on the bike. That curve aligns with the shape of the fender, the radius of that front fender. So that's intentional. I did take it over and match it up to the fender just to make sure that my eyes weren't deceiving me, and that is the way it's designed to be shaped. So it would be very easy for someone to go ahead and straighten that, not thinking it through, and then they're going to have a problem later when they go to put it together. We have the steering stem triple tree right here. Of course, some of that won't be powder coated, that being the stem itself. I'll have to talk to the powder coater about that. We have the battery box right here, pretty straightforward. We have the rear brake lever right there, and then the rear inner fender mount, and the right over here is a side stand. And I'd like to talk about those two pieces a bit more. This rear inner fender mount, if you recall, had some holes here, and actually I discovered an additional hole here that wasn't supposed to be there. So I welded those up and ground it back. Came out pretty good, as well as this side stand right here that I had to repair also. I did a separate little series of video clips on the repair of these two pieces. Interject those video clips here, and then we'll come back and have more discussion about these. Today I'm going to repair this inner rear fender liner for the TS50 project. I referenced this once before, these 3 holes here that I know were drilled by a previous owner for an unknown reason. I actually discovered a 4th hole right here. I looked at a number of these pieces online on eBay, and none of them had these 4 holes. And even though they positioned this one a little better than these 3, what I'm going to do is go ahead and weld them up. and seal them up before I send these parts off to powder coat. Now I'm well aware that many folks wouldn't even bother with this. They would paint this with a rattle can, put it up underneath the fender because it'd never be seen and be done with it, or at best maybe use a little JB weld or epoxy to fill these holes and sand it smooth, but that doesn't work for me. I'm particular about this kind of thing, so I'm going to weld these up, even though they're not going to be seen. I know it's there, and I just can't. I can't take shortcuts. So we're going to weld them up, grind it back before I send it off to powder coating. You will notice I didn't remove all the finish or all the old paint. The reason I didn't is because I want to leave that paint on as long as possible to prevent the rest of the part from starting the rusting process, which it will do once you remove this finish. So that will be removed just before it goes off to powder coating, or I'll even let the powder coater do it if they want. Some powder coaters prefer to strip the old finish themselves, others don't, so it will depend on what they want. I did check the thickness of this metal, and it's approximately an 18 gauge. You can see, I think I've got that written on there. And I do a little straightening and deburring because there are some burrs here from the drilling of the holes that normally occurs. So I cleaned this up a little bit. I made this little backer piece, this little copper backer piece right here. I took a piece of 3/4 inch copper pipe that I had left over from some old project, and I cut this piece out of it, and then I shaped it, as you can see, to match the shape of this part on the inside. So what I'm going to do, and you can see the arrows, I think right there, I can just line it up something like that. I will clamp it in place like this with my little clamp over here, and that'll be a backer for when I do the welding. Copper, or rather welding wire, because I use MIG, won't stick to that copper, so that'll just act as a backer for it. And then I can turn it over. I could replace this piece something like this if necessary. Probably won't be, but and then I'll probably do some welding on the back side also, and then I'll grind it back smooth when I'm done. And my goal is that when it's finished, it will look virtually like it's never been touched before. I'll have to reshape this piece for this hole right here. I haven't gotten to that yet, but that's basically the plan. So I'll set my MIG welder up to 18 gauge, and then I'll start the welding. I'm also going to repair this kickstand. Again, a very common situation where these take a lot of abuse because they're right down there at the dirt and the soil and the pavement, and you can see this one's been ground away right here, I think, on the end. So what I'm going to do is, with my welder, is I'm going to fix that hole. I'm going to build this up a bit here, around, and on the flat, because it's been ground away, and then I will grind that nice and flat as well before this goes off to powder coating. So that's the plan. Now I'm not going to show every little intricacy of welding. I will give you a flavor of what I'm going to be doing as I go, and certainly when we've got it complete, I'll bring you back and you'll see the finished product. Well, it's actually the next day, and I did most of the welding yesterday because it was a very nice day. And you can see I've got my setup here right in front of one of the overhead doors, so I can scooch this right outside and then do my welding and grinding outside on the front pad rather than in the shop. Otherwise you end up with that grinding dust all over everything. So that's my preferred technique. In the winter, of course, I can't do it that way, but we still have enough decent days, and yesterday was a very nice day, so I slid this out and did most of the welding and grinding, and it's the next morning. It's not very nice out today. It's raining, it's cold, and it's windy. Here's how far I got yesterday. So this is just a check-in for you. You can see I've done most of the welding here. Hope that light's not too bright for you. I talked about, or will talk about rather here in a little clip regarding the Dremel tool that I started using to grind this back because of the fairly fine features of this part. And I'll talk about the problem I have with the Dremel in a separate clip here in a few minutes after this one. But I started with the Dremel and ground it back, and then I ended up switching over to my die grinder, which isn't quite as precise, but it does work. I've got a couple of different die grinders, air-powered die grinders, so that's what I use for most of the heavy lifting here. Then late in the day yesterday before I was done, I just had to put a couple little more spot welds, as you can see. I had a couple little divots that I wasn't happy with that I refilled with weld, and then this morning I'll grind those back smooth. And we're getting very close to being complete with this part. Regarding the side stand, the kickstand, I also worked on that yesterday. I haven't really done anything with this today. Now, if you remember, there was a seam right here, and it had been ground off enough that there was the seam had opened up, and there actually was a cavity into the inside of this part. So I resealed that with weld, as you can see. I'm not quite done with this yet. And then I did build this pad up considerably, though it might not look like it right now. This is all fresh metal here that I built up and then ground flat with my 4.5 inch angle grinder right there with a 60 grit wheel. I'm real close to being finished with this. I'll probably do a little bit of final touch-up grinding, probably with a 120 grit wheel on the grinder. I'll have to scooch everything outside to do that real quick, or as far out as I can without getting wet, because as I said, it is raining. And touch this up a little bit, but for all practical purposes, this is very close to being finished. I believe this is much better condition right now, this section at the end, than it was probably when it left the factory. And I'll polish it up a little bit, clean it up a little bit, and once it's powder coated, it'll look like brand new. Now, I'm not going to bring you back at every piece and every step of this. I did want to share with you kind of a mid-process update on where I'm at with the welding and what's next. I'm going to finish these two pieces up today. I thought I'd take a little detour from working on that inner fender for the Suzuki. Talk about a problem I ran into with my little Dremel. It's a Dremel 3000, it's variable speed. I go through a Dremel tool probably every 6 or 8 years or so. This one is all of 6 years old. In fact, a few years ago I put new brushes in it, had it all apart, and I put a new pin in, the locking pin that holds the collar, or the spindle rather, here at the collar. So it's been serviced at least once, if not even more than that by now, and I know it's probably on borrowed time. I was using, or initially was intending to use this tool with the work that I'm doing on that metal inner fender and the welding to do some of the grinding, because the size of the welds and the position of them requires some finesse and some fine work, and I thought this would be the perfect tool for that. And you can see here some of the different bits I started to experiment with. I have a couple of, this is a ball end mill right here, little tiny ball end mill, and then I have just a regular milling bit. I think you can see that there, which is in the chuck right now. And I started to experiment with these to grind that weld back, and I ran into a problem. And that problem is that the locking collar, I turn this around, you're supposed to push this button in right here, this blue button with your finger. Most of you probably know that, and it locks the collar so that if you want to change the bits, you just, you can use a wrench. In this case, this happens to be a 3/8. I think it fits on like that. Or just spin this knurled fitting off to allow the collar to loose and slide the part out or the bit out. Well, that's the problem. The locking collar in here, there's really a pin, and when you push on this button here, this pin goes into a slot or a hole in a collar that's on the end of the spindle, and it's to lock the spindle so that you can, in fact, remove it with tools if you need to. Well, that's the problem, and let me see if I can show you here. I can hold this in with my finger and it's not locking. So what that tells me, if I can get this on here, see that? What that tells me is probably not the pin, because again I replaced it a few years ago. The hole in the collar, or the collar itself, is damaged to the extent that you know, I can't get it purchased with a pin. I think what I'm going to do is take this apart again. You have to pull the decals off here, these labels, pull it apart. Normally you would spin this collar off like that, but I can't get it off with this nose piece on here, part of the collet. So I've got to figure out how I'm going to get that apart, if I can, so that I can get in here and see if I can in fact repair it by replacing some of the parts. Service parts are readily available for these tools. You can get them. However, with the price of a new tool, this tool I think right now is going for around $80 US new or so, and probably a little less if you can get them on sale. They are available. I checked my local, some of my local hardware and big box stores, and they have them on the shelf. The issue might be to purchase the parts and put the time into repairing it. Might be half as much or more the parts than just buying a new tool. And this one again is probably getting to the end of its life. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but eventually I'm going to have to get in here and open this up, see what's going on. If I can reasonably buy new parts and put it back on its feet, because it is working okay, except for this, I will do so. But if its purchase price of parts is going to be more than at least 50% of the purchase part of the new tool, I'll probably just buy a new tool and keep this one around for parts. So that's what I ran into on the little Dremel. I ended up using my ear power die grinder instead of this at this point to work on the Fender, which is really what this video is all about. So we'll go back over to the Fender and we'll continue to talk about that in more detail. So these are the parts that I'm intending to have professionally powder coated. Now I'd like to talk about a few parts that I'm not going to have professionally powder coated. Either I'll do them myself later, or for one reason or the other, that's not going to work out. So let me change my setup here a little bit and we'll be right back. You might notice in the background a little computer fan whine. My shop computer, which runs on Windows 10, has decided right in the middle of everything here to update itself. Windows 10 does that. Those of you that have Windows know what I'm talking about. Should have shut the computer down. I didn't think of it when I started this video recording, so we're just going to have to kind of work through it here. Anyway, in the shot right now are the parts I am not intending at this point to have professionally powder coated. The seat, or the seat pan. The primary reason I'm not going to do that right now is I don't want to take the seat apart at this point, at this time. I'm going to wait. That'll come much later. And I'd have to peel the foam off and the seat cover and all of that, and I will probably end up powder coating that myself in my own oven. That will fit. I've done a number of seat pans myself, so I'm not concerned about that, but I just don't want to take it apart at this point. That's the primary reason. The rear shocks, I have touched on that before. I'm probably going to end up replacing those units in their entirety. If not, if for some reason I do have to take those apart and figure out a way to salvage them, which isn't likely, but in the event it is, I can powder coat those springs myself. The rear sprocket, drive sprocket, I'm going to replace that sprocket, and if because it's starting to hook, again, I think I referred to that also previously. If the replacement sprocket isn't black like the original was, I will powder coat that myself. And then the horn over here, the reason I'm not going to do the horn is that's really made as an assembly. It's partially plastic, partially metal. And though I could probably hack it apart and try to get the metal bracket off of the horn body, it's really not designed to come apart. So I really don't have a plan for it yet outside of seeing if I can find a good replacement or even clean that one up. The paint is actually very good on that. It's just dirty. But I haven't come up with a solution yet. And in the event, the rare unforeseen event that I might have to paint that myself after taking it apart, again, I can do that very easily. So these parts are not going to be powder coated at this time for the very reasons I just mentioned. My next step is to just get these all bundled up and get them off to the powder coater so he can get started on those. Probably will take them, if previous experience is any guide, a couple of weeks or so. I have 2 or 3 different powder coaters I have worked with over the years. They've all done a good job. They've all been reliable. I have not connected with them yet, one of them yet, which will be part of my next steps after I get this all finished, getting it organized and back together. Then the next thing we're going to move on to, while this is off being, all these other parts are being powder coated, these parts are just going to be set aside for now, and I think I'm going to get the chrome pieces that have to be chromed, organized, and together in a box. We'll probably talk about that also in an upcoming video, and then I'm going to get the motor or the engine up on the bench, and we'll get started on investigating what I need to do with that. That's going to be it for this video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.